I was lying on my couch watching a cockroach crawl across the wall. And I knew exactly what I should do. Get up. Go outside. Connect with people. Pursue something meaningful. The solution to my misery was obvious. Any rational person could see it. Any logical analysis would arrive at the same conclusion. And I could not do it. Not because I did not understand. But because understanding what I should do and being able to do it, these are completely different things. And lying there, watching that cockroach, analyzing my own paralysis with perfect clarity while remaining completely unable to act, I discovered something the rationalists never understood. That reason is not sufficient. That consciousness past a certain point becomes disease. That you can see clearly what you should do and do otherwise. And that this gap, this space between rational understanding and actual behavior, this is where most human life actually occurs. This is what the underground man shows. Not a failure of reason, but the limits of reason. The recognition that humans are not primarily rational creatures who occasionally fail to be rational, but primarily irrational creatures who occasionally succeed at rationality. And that building a system based on the assumption of human rationality, this is building on sand. I'm going to tell you today about why the underground man rejected rationalism. Not because he was stupid. Not because he could not understand rational arguments. But because he understood them too well. Understood that they described how humans should behave while completely failing to describe how humans actually behave. And why this distinction, this gap between should and actually, this matters more than any philosophical system that ignores it. Let me start with what rationalism actually is. Because people confuse it with being reasonable or thinking clearly. Rationalism is the belief that human behavior is primarily driven by rational calculation. That people act based on understanding their interests. That if you show someone the logical path to their happiness or success, they will follow it. That education and understanding are sufficient to solve human problems. That the solution to human suffering is better thinking, more knowledge, clearer reasoning. And that any behavior that seems irrational is simply the result of insufficient understanding or bad information or confused thinking. This is rationalism. The belief that reason is sufficient. That humans are primarily rational beings who can be perfected through better reasoning. The underground man despises this. Not because he values irrationality, but because he sees what rationalism misses. That humans consistently act against their rational interests. Consistently choose suffering over happiness. Consistently do what they know is destructive while understanding perfectly well that it is destructive. And that this is not accident. Not confusion. Not lack of understanding. But something fundamental to human nature. Something that reason cannot touch. Cannot change. Cannot even fully explain because it operates on a different level than reason operates. I experienced this most clearly in my gambling. I understood probability. Understood that the house always wins. Understood that I was destroying my family's finances. Could calculate exactly how much I was losing and what it would cost us. And I gambled anyway. Not because I did not understand. But because understanding was not sufficient to stop me. Anna would explain rationally why I should not gamble. Would show me the numbers. Would make arguments I could not refute. And I would agree with every word. Would admit she was completely right, and would go to the gaming house anyway. Not because her reasoning was flawed, but because reason was not controlling my behavior. Something else was. Something irrational. Something that knew perfectly well it was acting destructively and did not care or could not stop even when it did care. This is what rationalism cannot account for. This gap between understanding and action. This capacity to see clearly what you should do and do otherwise. The rationalists assumed this gap was temporary. That with enough education, enough understanding, enough clear thinking, people would naturally align their behavior with their rational interests. But the underground man knows this is false. The gap is not temporary. It is permanent. It is not a failure of reason but a limit of reason. Reason can show you what you should do. Cannot make you do it. And any system built on the assumption that showing people what they should do is sufficient, this system will fail. Not because people are stupid, but because they are not primarily rational. Let me tell you about the Crystal Palace. I visited it in London in 1862. This massive glass structure representing everything the rationalists believed. Perfect order. Scientific progress. Rational planning. They believed this was the future. That human problems could be solved through better organization and clearer thinking. That suffering was just bad planning. That if you could create perfect systems, you could create perfect people. And standing inside the Crystal Palace, I felt sick. Because I saw what they could not see. That this was a cage. That perfection achieved through rational planning would eliminate the very thing that makes humans human. The capacity for irrational choice. The need for suffering. The desire to act against one's own interests simply to prove that one can. The rationalists thought they were building paradise. They were building prison. The underground man articulates this perfectly. He says that humans will act against their rational interests simply to prove they are not piano keys. Not predictable machines that can be programmed through correct reasoning. That there is something in human nature that would rather suffer freely than be happy automatically. That would rather choose wrongly than have the right choice made for them. And this is not just perversity. This is something fundamental. This is humans recognizing that pure rationality eliminates agency. That if reason determines everything, then choice means nothing. That freedom requires the possibility of irrational action. And that humans value freedom more than they value happiness or success or anything else reason promises. I want to be clear about something. This is not celebrating irrationality. Not suggesting that reason is worthless or that clear thinking does not matter. The underground man is not saying we should embrace stupidity or confusion or ignorance. He is saying something more subtle. That reason is necessary but not sufficient. That you need clear thinking, but clear thinking alone will not make you able to act. That the rationalists are correct about what humans should do but wrong about what humans actually do. And that building systems based on should rather than on actually, this creates systems that fail regardless of how logically perfect they are. Think about your own life. Think about how many times you have known exactly what you should do. Should exercise. Should eat better. Should stop drinking. Should fix your relationships. Should pursue meaning instead of distraction. Should face your problems instead of avoiding them. And think about how many times you have failed to do what you knew you should do. Not because you did not understand, but because understanding was not enough. Because something irrational, something that operates below the level of conscious reasoning, prevented action. Or drove action opposite to your rational understanding. This is universal. This is the human condition. And any philosophy that ignores this, that assumes rational understanding leads automatically to rational behavior, this philosophy is describing an idealized human that does not exist rather than the messy, contradictory, frequently irrational humans who actually exist. Raskolnikov is a perfect example. He develops a completely rational theory. The extraordinary man theory. Logically consistent. Philosophically sophisticated. And he murders based on this theory. And immediately discovers that his theory cannot protect him from guilt. Cannot rationalize away horror. Cannot make him feel the way the theory predicted he would feel. Because theories about how humans should respond are not the same as how humans actually respond. And his entire breakdown is the collision between rational theory and irrational reality. Between what should happen according to logic and what actually happens in a human consciousness that is not primarily logical. The rationalists in Dostoevsky's time believed that education would eliminate crime. That if you explained to criminals why crime was against their interests, they would stop committing crimes. That poverty and suffering were the result of ignorance and bad planning. That rational systems properly implemented would create rational people. And Dostoevsky, having spent 4 years in Siberian prison living among criminals, knew this was fantasy. Knew that criminals understood perfectly well that crime was against their interests. Knew that people committed crimes not from confusion but from passion, from need, from perversity, from all the irrational drives that rationalism pretended did not exist or could be educated away. Let me tell you about a prisoner in Siberia I will call Andrei. He was intelligent, educated, could discuss philosophy and literature. And he had killed a man in a tavern fight over an insult. Over nothing. And when I asked him why throw away his life over words that meant nothing, he could not explain rationally. Said he knew it was stupid even as he was doing it. Knew he would regret it. Knew it would destroy his life. but did it anyway. Because in that moment the insult felt more real than any rational consideration. The rage felt more powerful than any logical argument. And the action happened before reason could intervene. This is what rationalism cannot account for. This gap between knowing what is right and doing what is immediate. Between understanding consequences and acting on impulse. Between should and actually. The underground man says that reason is a good thing. But that humans are not just reason. That we contain drives and passions and perversities that reason cannot control and cannot even fully explain. That we want things that are bad for us. That we pursue suffering sometimes more passionately than we pursue happiness. That we sabotage ourselves not accidentally but deliberately. And that any system that ignores this, that assumes humans will naturally align their behavior with rational understanding, this system will fail because it is built on false assumptions about human nature. I think about my epilepsy in this context. The seizures were irrational. Completely beyond reason's control. I could understand medically what was happening. Could predict when they might occur. Could take precautions. And none of this mattered when a seizure came. Reason disappeared. Control disappeared. What remained was purely physical, purely irrational, completely beyond anything my rational mind could influence. And experiencing this, experiencing my own consciousness being overridden by something irrational and uncontrollable, this taught me what rationalists refuse to see. That reason is one part of human nature. Important part. But not the controlling part. Not the fundamental part. And that treating humans as though they are primarily rational beings, this is a fundamental category error. The rationalists had an answer for everything. For poverty. For crime. For suffering. For war. All problems had rational solutions. All conflicts could be resolved through better understanding. All human darkness could be illuminated through clearer thinking. And the underground man watches these confident solutions and laughs. Not because he has better solutions, but because he knows that most human problems are not problems of insufficient understanding. They are problems of insufficient control. Of irrational drives overriding rational knowledge. Of people doing what they know is wrong because the irrational part of human nature is stronger than the rational part. And that no amount of education or understanding or clear thinking can change this fundamental imbalance. Let me tell you what happened after I stopped gambling. Not that I conquered it through reason. Not that I developed a better understanding of probability or consequences. But that I exhausted the irrational drive that was controlling me. Ran out of energy to feed it. And even then, even after stopping, the pull remained. The irrational desire to gamble stayed. Understanding that it was destructive did not eliminate it. Just made me aware of it while it operated. And this awareness without control, this seeing clearly what you are driven to do while being unable to stop being driven to it, this is worse than ignorance. This is consciousness as disease. This is what the underground man experiences constantly. Perfect clarity about his own self-destruction combined with perfect inability to stop destroying himself. The rationalists believed that consciousness was always good. That awareness was always beneficial. That the more clearly you understood yourself and your circumstances, the better you could navigate them. But the underground man proves this false. Shows that consciousness past a certain point becomes paralysis. That seeing too clearly can prevent action. That understanding all the reasons why something will fail can make you unable to attempt it. That perfect rational analysis can show you that nothing is worth pursuing and thus leave you unable to pursue anything. This is consciousness as disease. Not too little awareness. Too much awareness without sufficient irrational drive to override the awareness and force action anyway. I want to speak to something the rationalists said that sounds good but is actually terrible. They said that humans naturally pursue their self-interest. That if you understand what is good for you, you will do it. And this sounds reasonable. Sounds like it should be true. But the underground man knows it is false. Knows that humans frequently do what is against their self-interest. Not from confusion. On purpose. Because being self-interested in the rational sense is boring. Is predictable. Is mechanical. And humans would rather be free than be happy. Would rather prove they can choose wrongly than be forced to choose rightly. Would rather suffer from their own choices than be happy from someone else's choices. This is not perversity. This is the need for agency, for genuine choice, for freedom that includes the possibility of choosing wrongly. The rationalists wanted to eliminate this, wanted to create systems so perfect that wrong choices became impossible, where everything was organized so rationally that people would naturally do what was good for them because the rational path was made clear and easy. And the underground man sees that this is not paradise. This is the death of humanity. Because if wrong choices are impossible, then choice itself is meaningless. If you can only do what reason dictates, then you are not choosing. You are being programmed. And humans will rebel against this. Will do irrational things simply to prove they are not machines. Will choose suffering simply to prove they can choose. Will act against their interests simply to prove they have the freedom to act against their interests. Think about your own resistance to good advice. Think about times when someone told you something completely rational, completely correct, something that would clearly benefit you if you followed it. And think about how often you did otherwise. Not because their reasoning was wrong, but because following their reasoning felt like surrender. Felt like admitting you were predictable. Felt like being controlled even when no control was intended. This resistance is irrational. Costs you. Hurts you. And is fundamental to being human. Is the way humans maintain agency in a world that constantly tries to reduce them to rational calculation. The underground man embodies this resistance taken to its extreme. He refuses to do anything that reason suggests. Refuses to pursue happiness because happiness is predictable. Refuses to improve his circumstances because improvement is what rational analysis suggests. Refuses to connect with others because connection is obviously beneficial. And this extreme resistance is not something to emulate, not something healthy, but it reveals something true. That humans contain a drive toward irrationality that is as strong as any drive toward rationality. And that ignoring this drive, pretending it does not exist, building systems that assume it can be educated away, this creates systems that fail because they are built on false premises about human nature. I think about Ivan Karamazov in this context. Ivan constructs the most sophisticated rational argument against God, against meaning, against accepting the world as it is. His argument cannot be refuted logically, is philosophically sound, intellectually rigorous, and it drives him mad. Not because the argument is wrong, but because living by pure rationality is impossible for humans. Because reason alone cannot create meaning, cannot generate purpose, cannot make existence bearable. And Ivan, refusing to accept anything irrational, refusing to believe anything that cannot be rationally justified, discovers that this leaves him with nothing, with no reason to continue, with perfect understanding that makes life impossible rather than possible. Contrast this with Alyosha. Alyosha is not irrational, but he accepts that reason is not sufficient. That faith requires something beyond rational justification. That love requires acting beyond what reason suggests is safe. That meaning requires accepting something that reason cannot prove. And this acceptance of the irrational alongside the rational, this makes him able to live, makes him able to act, makes him able to connect and love and continue. Not because he is stupid, but because he understands that humans are not primarily rational and that trying to live as though you are primarily rational is a path to paralysis and despair. The underground man never learns this. Stays trapped in his underground apartment, analyzing everything, understanding everything, capable of nothing, because he has developed his rational consciousness to the point where it prevents all action, where every possible choice can be shown to be flawed, where every potential relationship can be analyzed to reveal its inevitable failure, where every pursuit can be demonstrated to be ultimately pointless. And this perfect rationality leaves him with nothing except awareness of his own paralysis, perfect consciousness of his own disease, clear understanding that understanding alone is not sufficient. I want to tell you what rationalism actually produces. Not better humans, not reduced suffering, not rational paradise, but people who are educated enough to understand what they should do and powerless to do it. People who can analyze their problems perfectly while being unable to solve them. People who know what would make them happy while being unable to pursue it. People who understand their self-destruction while being unable to stop it. This is rationalism's actual result. Not transcendence of irrationality, but consciousness of irrationality without power over it. And this consciousness without power is worse than the irrationality it observes. Is suffering added to suffering? Is disease aware of itself without cure? So when I tell you why the underground man rejected rationalism, I am not telling you to reject clear thinking or rational analysis or logical argument. These things have value. These things matter. What I am telling you is that reason is not sufficient. That understanding what you should do is not the same as being able to do it. That humans are not primarily rational beings who occasionally fail at rationality, but are primarily irrational beings who occasionally succeed at rationality. And that any approach to human life that ignores this, that builds systems based on assumptions about rational behavior, this approach will fail. Not because the reasoning is bad, but because the assumptions about human nature are false. Because humans actually are not what rationalists believe humans should be. And no amount of education or understanding or clear thinking can change what humans actually are into what theories say they should be.